Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How's everybody doing at the beginning of this week? We hope it's going to be a good week for you.
Let me tell you something. We've been living in pure hell as far as weather goes. Where we at, everybody knows that when we travel, we use a travel trailer. And where we at, it's been raining pretty much every damn day. Is that correct?
Getting a little bit discouraging. I almost think it's like I made a reference to that we think we're almost in the UK because, almost on the verge of having to build an ark because you get outside and it's just like a complete sponge and rain. I know we need rain for all the animals and the plants, but I mean, this is to the point we're almost going to get rained away or swept away by moisture, and can get very depressing at times with not being able to see the sun, because as we know, the sun is very important. So hoping that's going to change. We're on a positive swing, so things do change, and we're going to keep positive about the weather.
But literally every day for the last month it's been raining up here. Every day in Bryan, Texas. So all right. So again, we're Timothy, Mark, and Alexandria, and we are with the World Paranormal Research Society. The website is worldparanormalresearchsociety.org. You can go there. We don't update it as frequently as we should because we're so busy. And right now, we've been busy trying to deal with this damn weather. And number two, the YouTube channel is World Paranormal Research Society. When you go there and if you like what you hear, subscribe to our channel. When I say we and our, this is the Timothy, Mark, and Alexandria show. So if I say we, I'm clearly referring to me, Timothy, and she, her, is Alexandria. So if I say she or her, then I would assume that most of our audience out there has the ability to understand that if I say we, put this in the context of what I'm talking about. If I say, like in the last podcast, when I say we are going to do an event down in Austin, Texas, and then I say she will be doing ruin readings there. When I say it like that, I'm talking about Alexandria. But there's some people out there that can't get it. They don't put it in the context of the conversation. So what I would do for those people is I will try to be better about, instead of saying she and her, I was trying to say Alexandria. But for those of you that do get it, good. So these are the people that we're currently talking to, the ones that can put things in the context of the conversation. So what we're going to talk about today would be Scrying, John Dee, and spellcasting. So these subjects are something that's may seem relatively new or weird to the people of today, in today's world, but actually in times of old, there was something that was very common and popular. So popular, in fact, that if you look at Scrying made it into the Snow White cartoon and story, but and that was done by Brothers Grimm, and they put it into the story, but y'all might not have recognized it as Scrying, and we'll talk about it in more detail here in a little bit.
I think I'm going to jump in. I think Timothy, even me, just think of the reference mirror, mirror on the wall, and then I'll leave it at that as a little bit of food for the. It's not exactly like that, but
no, it is exactly like that.
In simple terms, you'll see a lot of movies without even realizing where the reference to mirror, mirror on the wall. So I'm going to leave it again at that. I don't want to get the cat out of the bag and spoil it, but put yourself into that mindset, and I think as the show begins to unfold, you're going to really see, yeah, I remember seeing that, and the pieces are all going to come together just like doing a magical jigsaw puzzle.
Right, and so, Alexandria was right. When Snow White, when the evil queen was saying, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, that was scrying. That was a technique for scrying, and Brothers Grimm, who operated out of Germany, they are actually very familiar with it in their time period, and it was something that a lot of people did. especially in Europe in their time period, in the time that they existed. So it was natural to put it in a story because a lot of people did it. However, when they did the mirror, mirror on the wall, what happened was a lot of people assume that scrying is just done out of a mirror. But we'll go more into that, and you're going to talk about spellcasting today. You want to give a little summary on that before we get started?
Well, spellcasting, I mean, a lot of you that are of the Wicca faith, or a lot of witches out there, are familiar with the word spellcasting. And I'm going to get into really the dynamics of spellcasting. It's simply a lot more than going to your local bookstore and getting a book on spells. A lot of us are familiar. You go to your bookstore and there's love spells, money spells. You can even now buy candles in your local grocery store that are said, if you light this candle and say a prayer, it'll be giving you money and protection. So we have, we even have a candle in here that's a protection candle. That's a form of spell casting. But I'm really going to take you and really strip it down right to the foundations, and we're going to build it right up, and you're going to begin to see that it's simply more than just opening a book, reciting a spell that somebody else has written, and hoping that it's going to bring you either love, fame, fortune, money. So it's a lot more than that. And spellcasting has been around for thousands of years. We're not going to go really back into the history. I'm just going to go into the dynamics of what it is.
Yeah, and one of the things that used to happen back in the Hebrew times, and when I say Hebrew times, I'm talking about the foundation of Christianity, and which is Judaism, is that spells were actually used. A lot of Christian bookstores, especially here in Texas, if you go there, they actually have spell books. Now, people say, well, how do they have these spell books when it's not in my King James Version Bible? Clearly, I've said it before, you cannot use the King James Version Bible to live and die by. Okay, you can't do it. It's a summary and a rough estimate of the facts, and you have to get deeper into it. They pull out these spells from older texts, and that's why they're for sale in the Christian bookstore. And so it's something that's been used in Judaism and Christianity as well. But what we'll talk about, what we'll get started with right now first, is scrying. Scrying is also known as crystal gazing. So the earliest, if you think of the earliest forms of scrying, would be crystals. And so how did people, the media used would be crystals anyway. So how did people get into figuring out that you can do this by crystals? Very simple. If you stare into a crystal long enough, things will be revealed to you. And so it does date back to ancient Egypt. This does, because it was used. There were silver chalices that was used in ancient Egypt. A silver chalice was used. It was very common among the ancient Egyptians to use silver chalices for scrying purposes. And it was so common, in fact, that it's actually mentioned in the story of Joseph in the Bible. When Joseph was wanting to blend in with the Egyptians, so to speak, in the story of Joseph, one of the things that Benjamin put into a sack was a silver chalice, and that was to help identify himself as an ancient Egyptian, which would have been modern Egyptian at the time for him. But so yeah, so crystal gazing, this would be the most popular and potent in the old days. Potency being very important. We know the power of crystals, and maybe you have some stories on crystals that I know you talked about it before.
Well, I have a little magical drawstring bag that has various crystals. I have a amethyst, and we all know that, I'm assuming what Timothy is referring to, they may have used a lot of quartz crystal. Quartz crystal is the clear crystal, and you can make pendulums out of them. You can have gemstones that you keep in your pocket, your magical bag, or you can have them around your altar if you do have an altar. But they have been used for eons in regards to looking into the future, and again using a pendulum as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the ancient Egyptians used it for. They used it for prophecy. They used it for prophecy and to predict, if you will, the future. And that's when not just the ancient Egyptians used it, but also the Sumerians. It was used in ancient civilizations all over the world, actually. And it's been very common all the way even into the 19th century. It is only within the last 80 or 90 years that it's been thought of, well, I'd say almost 100 years it's been thought of as bad. And the reason why it's been thought of as bad, because it's changed so much from its original form. Now, when we talk about scrying in its original form, it was done through crystals to predict or prophesize. So, other media for scrying is mirrors, and this is the most well known for the people out there. And this is known, like we just said, in the story of Snow White. But if you want to go back to the crystal, think about how many times you've seen movies like The Wizard of Oz or something like that, where somebody has a crystal ball in it. They're actually using a crystal ball. There was a movie made in 1943 called The Crystal Ball. And they stare into this crystal ball to prophesize or tell you the future. And so it was very common, like I said. And when we think of movies like that and people like that, we think of like the old gypsies doing it. But it was actually not old gypsies doing it back in the days. It was common people that were doing it. So, other media that was used was glowing coals. What can be made from a coal? What rock?
Lava? I don't know. I mean,
lava. Lava comes from a volcano.
I had to give everybody a joke today.
So let me ask you this question. Wow, lava can be made from
heat.
From a coal. Yeah, heat can be made from a coal.
Lava, volcano, heat. There you go.
No lava. No lava coming from coals. That would be very bad. It would burn right through your grill. But there is a certain stone that they call it a woman's best friend or a woman's favorite thing that can be made from a coal. So that's a trivia question. I give it to you at the end of the show. But other media used was smoke and water. Okay, so when we talk about smoke, we think about the Indians, the Native Americans. When we came over here, what would they do? They would sit there and they would gaze into the smoke. That's a form of scrying, and they would have visions and things of that nature. The water is something that was that John Dee did. John Dee being the he worked for. Tell us a little bit.
He was the court advisor for Queen Elizabeth I, and although he's best known as her court magician, he is also one of England's most learned men. And I'm going to go with, he'll be the last topic that I'll be bringing to you guys more in depth about just who was John Dee, or Dr. John Dee, a very learned person and an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. So we won't go into that now.
So there you go. Queen Elizabeth I advisor used a bowl of water for scrying purposes. He also used a magic mirror. But who else used a bowl of water? Nostradamus. There's a lot of people that say that some of his predictions didn't turn out right, and some of them did. I mean, I can predict that, 100. Well, I can predict without even looking into a crystal ball or a mirror that a tree will fall in Georgia, and someone would get spooked by it in 100 years. Well, that's bound to happen. The odds of that happening is pretty well and good. But Nostradamus, he made a lot of predictions. Some of them were said to have came true, and some of them don't. Depending on what you think of him, he used scrying as well. And so, let's see here. In the 1820s, this is a very interesting story, actually. In the 1820s, if you think of Mormons, you would not think, because the Christians today, or the Mormons today, or the Catholics today, think of scrying as being a form of evil or a form of something that you shouldn't do. But in the 1820s, Joseph Smith founded the Latter-day Saint movement by scrying. He was already a scryer before he ever, he had 3 stones that he used for scrying before he ever founded the Latter-day Saint movement. What was he using the stone for? Was for the 3 stones, he was using them for treasure hunting. Well, one day, through the visions that he's seen in the stones, he decided to start the Latter-day Saints movement. So whatever you think about the Mormons or stuff like that, it's very interesting to know that in the beginning, it was a part of their religion, and actually the Book of Mormon was created through scrying. And so if you think about that, that'd give you a different take on the Book of Mormon. And so that's something that, like I say, is not accepted in the Christian world today. In the 1800s and early 1900s, scrying was common and popular. I mean, like if you go back and you watch some old Popeye cartoons, you even see like the cartoons using crystal balls. I think you said that crystal balls was using Snow White.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely using the Wizard of Oz. And so
yeah, but what about if you, in the early 1900s, when they had those traveling, not freak shows, but traveling circuses, they always had a fortune teller with a crystal ball, and then it evolved into having these electronic mechanism with a gentleman with a turban with a crystal ball where you could pay, I think, a quarter or whatever it was in the times, and you would get your fortune told. So it's evolved from these traveling circuses, traveling freak shows, into even now wonder shows. When they travel all around North America, they also have games which can tell your fortune with an individual with a crystal ball.
And the games are not accurate. They're not going to work. It's more of a trick because it takes the human body, soul, and mind to interpret what you're seeing within the no computer rig machine can do it. So that's a complete waste of money.
Or they've just capitalized on an idea in the effort to try and make money off of people that have their pockets full going to these shows.
But you know what made scrying, if you think about it, how common it was and how accepted it was within and many cultures around the world at the time, where people were carrying crystals with them, or they had crystal balls and stuff like that. But what made it bad actually was when you come up to the story of Bloody Mary, and how when that story started becoming more widespread, scrying was looked at as a bad thing. Now we talked about how in the early 1900s it was very much common among people. It was so common that Bela Lugosi, the second person to play Dracula, Bela Lugosi, it was something common that he did. He would scry all the time, but he would scry not to prophesize or see the future. He would prophesize for a different reason, and that's why he used a mirror. And the different reason was he scried to see the dead, or talk to angels or demons, and that's what he was doing. And we all know that he struggled with a drug addiction, heroin, and we know that heroin helps open up the DMT in the brain, and it helped him see a lot of things. But if you look at Bela Lugosi, and you look at the fact that he was not an American, he was an immigrant, and you look at his culture, scrying was something that he really grew up with. It was something that was very accepted, and it was something that he was used to. But he figured a way, he through the different media that was used, he recognized mirrors as being something that where he could use it for a different purpose, which was seeing demons, talking to the dead, and things of that nature.
Yeah, but when you're talking about that topic, moving forward from Bela Lugosi's time, how many horror movies can you think of that have incorporated a mirror or a demon or a ghost trapped into a mirror in some dusty attic? There's been, right now,
Candyman.
That's right. But what other horror movies that have become cult classics that incorporate a mirror and that philosophy? A lot of them.
There's been a lot of them, but it was so accepted into the community that when you look at it, Bob Hope did a movie about scrying, and it was a comedy. So it was put into dramas, it was put into comedy films, it was put into action films. It was only later in life when it started being less popular among the religious groups that it started becoming a thing of horror. And it's not really a thing of horror. It's a thing of it's a thing that everybody should try. Alexandria said that that she's talking about a quartz crystal, which is true. That's the most famous one to use. Will be the quartz crystal. The Dr. John Dee Theater of the Mind Research Institute. Then again, let's talk about this. Dr. John Dee Theater of the Mind Research Institute uses crystals today, and it's an institute that's functioning today. Uses crystals to speak to the dead. That's their sole purpose of it, which is different, I find, than what John Dee used it for. Where he used it for prophecy and basically telling the future. But the institute itself, which exists today in modern times, they use it for communicating with the dead. In Scotland, they have a crystal ball in the Royal Sceptre. I guess that's like a museum over there. Mm-hmm. But they have a crystal ball in there, and their crystal ball. The story behind it was that it was originally possessed by Druid demons. So the crystal ball that they have in this Royal Spectre, I can't even pronounce the word, SCEPTRE. Well, how's that? Spectre, which I guess again is like a museum. They took off the Druids, and it was the thing that was thought of to be possessed at the time. But they have it in a museum, and it's on display there. Recently, Donald Trump, he was at the History Museum in Washington, D.C., and he was rubbing all over the crystal ball over there. And so they have a crystal ball there as well. So we can think of some of the movies again. Was Wizard of Oz. Have you seen the show Charmed?
Yes, that's a TV show about the witches, yes.
All right, the show Charmed, what they used every time they needed to locate somebody, they actually used a crystal to locate people where they were at and stuff like that.
Like a homing device almost.
Yeah, like a homing device.
But even with the technology these days, I can't really think of it at the moment, but technology, how many different machines started out using crystals? What about watches using quartz crystal when you have a watch?
Right. I mean, we know there's a lot of power in the crystal. I mean, the Egyptians used it for many reasons. They didn't just use it for prophecy and fortune telling. What they used it for too was there's people, whether you believe this topic or not, but there's people out there that's UFO researchers that say that they used it to communicate with aliens. But whatever you think about it, okay. So let's try an experiment. You can go inside your bathroom, or you can take a mirror in your bedroom or whatever, and stare in it. It's more than just staring in it. You have to meditate in it. And there's people that do it for like 5 minutes or so, and they give up. 3 minutes or so, and they give up. But if you actually focus time in it, do it for like 10 minutes, and you may think that nothing's happened, but that little thing that you think was your eyelid blinking, or did I see that or did I not see that? That's stuff from the other side, the other reality. And so if you just focus on it and meditate before you do it, and meditate into the mirror, and just focus and concentrate, you're bound to see something.
Just like in horror movies, you have somebody looking into their bathroom mirror, and that's when you see the image, the demon or the ghost looking back at you in the bathroom mirror. I mean, I can see a lot of movies that have they incorporate a mirror where you're looking into it, and all of a sudden you blink and you see another image in there, and then it's gone.
If you look throughout history and look at some of the most famous fortune tellers, or the most famous people who practice scrying, they tend to be more women. And why is this? Because while the men were at work and or whatever they were doing, the women were at home combing their hair and looking into the mirror, or looking into a crystal, and they would ask the crystal things, and they would get answers back. And so it's weird to hear this today, and it's weird to think, okay, this sounds strange, or this sounds crazy. A lot of you might think that this sounds crazy, but it was something that was very accepted and did not sound crazy to a lot of civilizations, even in America at one time. in the United States of America. So it's something that a lot of people still practice today, but they have to practice it behind closed doors because people just assume, oh, these people are devil worshippers, oh, these people are weird, which is just ignorance.
Back to that is that, that's something that's been around for a very long time, and it just shows you how modern day society, we all do it without realizing it, but we're not using the word scrying. It's just there's a joke too. Timothy says to me, I'm always in the bathroom, and he makes that comment to me, oh, you must be looking in the mirror again. So that's a prime example of women looking into mirrors. She
constantly tells me she's not, but here's the question. Okay, now, every place we stop, it's the first thing she says, I got to go to the bathroom. And when she comes out, I say, you must have been in that mirror, right? She'll say, no, I was using the bathroom. But I noticed that her lipstick's brand new. It's been repainted on there, and so there's definitely some time spent in the mirror.
Well, I did have to use the facilities, and then yes, once you're there, you may as well look into the mirror. You're out in the world. You don't want to look like crap as a woman. You can any women out there, you can relate to that. You always want to put your best face forward, and it's just a matter of when you're washing your hands, touching up your hair or your makeup. That's just what us women do.
Yeah, but that's let me give you an example. We could go out to eat, right? And before we leave, she'll say, I gotta use the bathroom. 10 minutes later, we'll stop by a store. Right when we enter the door, she'll be like, I gotta use the bathroom.
Well, when you're traveling as much as we are traveling, a bathroom could be few and far between. So, you got to take advantage of it, because you're not going to sit driving 2 hours in a vehicle very uncomfortable because you have to empty your bladder. Let's be realistic. So we do a lot of traveling. That's why, we're ultra super busy.
And speaking of the traveling, again, we're dealing with a weather situation to the point where the travel trailer has actually got a small leak in it, and I have to fix it. But before I can fix it, the weather has to dry out. It has to dry out. It just has to dry.
I just thought, one of these days I was going to wake up and Timothy would be constructing an ark. I figured I'd wake up
construct an ark.
Just to save us in case we float away.
So it'll be Timothy's ark now instead of Noah's ark. But let me ask you now, you're going to talk about which one you're going to go
I'm going to talk
John Dee?
I'm going to talk about spellcasting first, because that sort of will sort of intertwine with the scrying crystals. And I myself am a spellcaster. I have various spells that I do on a regular basis, and it's part of my lifestyle. And really, when we start to learn what spell casting is and what it is about. And in recent times we have all these TV shows and movies like Charmed, the movie Practical Magic, or the movie one of my favorite movies out there is The Craft. It's about these teenage girls, and it gives you a perspective into spell casting. Maybe not the correct way to spell cast, but every time that movie comes on, I always got to watch it, and it gives you a perspective in what can go wrong if you're not properly prepared. But really, when learning spell casting, it is so very, very important to understand the dynamics of what a spell actually is, what they are. First thing that comes to mind is love spells. Well, you know what? It's a lot more involved that just says, I like this individual, I want to cast a love spell, or go to an individual that can do that. A lot more. And the use of a spell is really meant to, and there's two things. The first one is to change the inner landscape to prepare you for going after your intent. And you're going to hear me mention that word over and over, intent, because intent is so very important when you're dealing with spells and spell casting. So number one is you've got to change the inner landscape, and that's your inner landscape. Number two is that you have to really direct the conduit energy that you will draw your intent to you. So you have to really direct the energy that you're going to inspire and draw it into you, or to clear the path for you to reach your goal. So you're really going to clear the path. And the way that one designs and executes a spell can vary greatly depending on your knowledge, your skill. But the principles still remain the same. So that means our technique, our routine, our preparation may differ, but the principles all should remain the same. And the way I'm going to sort of put it, maybe an easy way to understand, is that I like to think of spellcasting like buildings. And all over the world there are buildings with different designs, different construction techniques. They're built from different materials. And no matter what they look like on the outside, whether they're tall, short, brick, steel, ornate, or very simple, they still have to adhere to very basic engineering principles for a sturdy frame and foundation to hold them up. So on the outside, it can be completely different parts of the world, but the basic principles for a sturdy frame and foundation have to be the same for them to stand up. And that's what you have to do when you're spell casting. And likewise, just the way that you design and execute a spell can vary. A lot depends on your methods, and it could be a witch's method or just your methods, your religious philosophies, and your tools and your components. But underneath, there is a common framework. So what that's telling you, it doesn't matter what tools you're using, what techniques, what you're wearing, what your altar looks like, what crystals that you're using, underneath there has to remain a common framework. And the foundation is exactly what holds up the spell or the power of the spell. And very important.
Can I say something right now? For those of y'all out there that might think I'm interrupting, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just, I want to add something to that. Spell casting was definitely used in Judaism. And one of the things that the altar is very specific on how you construct an altar in Judaism. Matter of fact, in Judaism, you cannot take an oath before God without that unhewn stone altar. And so there's many different cultures have many different altars, but yeah, that's the one that's used in Judaism.
And talking about altars, I mean, we all have how we want to construct our altars. And again, Timothy is trying to bring a valid point that religious faiths have different ways that they adhere to construct their altar. And if you remember the Aztecs, really, they had an altar when they did, they brought their victims up, their sacrificial victims, and they actually had a sacrificial knife. So a lot of you that have altars on there may have a knife, may use a skull, some of you use feathers. And in voodoo and hoodoo, they have specific altars that they have prior to casting their spells or their particular rituals. Ancient Egyptians, every culture had a certain way that they prepared and had specific tools prior to them spell casting.
Even the Aztec, it's now you say okay, spell casting, but you may not know some of the ritualistic acts are considered spells. If you look at the Aztecs, they had a specific blade that they used to sacrifice the people to their god, and they had an altar and the way that they did it also.
And that was a lot of people were ritualistically sacrificed to the gods when crops failed or they wanted to bring water or prosperity. So they had a sacrificial altar, the knife that they used. So it was very constructed specifically. So you have to be into that specific mindset when you're going into your spell casting.
Not just that, but when you think of sacrifices, and I'm going to let you get back to your story here. But when you think about altars and sacrifices, one of the if you ask somebody who in history sacrificed people, you hear Aztecs, you hear different religious people, right? A little known fact, because the books have been watered down, is in Judaism used to also have human sacrifice.
And, almost every faith, whether they want to believe it or not, the Druids had sacrificial. There's people all through different cultures that sacrificed, and it was considered a spell. And we talk about the bog victims, that we know a lot of these bog people that were ritualistically sacrificed were actually kings and queens, because they sacrificed themselves for crops. So that was a way that certain spells were done. And if you get into spell casting, there's really 5 essential parts to casting a spell. You're not just walking into a bookstore, purchasing a book on spells, reading a spell, and you're going to expect that the spell is going to really work. I mean, that's very, very dangerous, and that's very naive to think like that. Number 1 in the 5 steps is you really have to prepare. I really can't stress that enough. And you really have to define what your intent is. You have to determine the proper timing. A lot of spells have to be done under a full moon, half a moon, different spring, fall, different spells. You have to gather your supplies, and you have to prepare yourself and prepare your space. Very, very important. When I mean prepare your space, you have to set up a magical space. Every time I do any works of magic, any spell casting, top priority is that you have to create a magical, safe space, whether it be a magical circle that's has salt all around you. We all have our different ways of preparing your space. Very, very just as important is preparing yourself. Meditate, ground yourself, surround yourself by a white light. Please do not start any spell casting, any magical works without preparing yourself, preparing your space. Very, very important. In our line of work, we preparing ourselves is at the very, very top of the list. If you do not prepare yourself, you could set yourself into a world of hurt. Even if you're pulling out your tarot cards or anything that you use for divination, even prior to scrying, prepare yourself, prepare your space. I cannot reiterate how important that is. Number 2 is your state of mind. Your state of mind when you go into spell casting is very, very important. You really have to have a positive intent. So we're dealing with white magic and a very positive intent. Number 3 is that you have to have the ability to link your intent. And a way that you can link your intent is to state it. You can say it, you can hear it, or you can use sensory stimulation. And what sensory stimulation is, pick an image, a smell, or something that reminds you of your goal. So if you're doing something in regards to a love spell, have something that maybe is a possession of this individual. Maybe they wore this specific perfume, they smoked this specific cigarette, something that reminds you in a sensory way to your intent, or that reminds you of your goal. Number 4 is that raising and directing and releasing energy. Very, very important. And energy comes from internal sources, your emotional state, your thoughts, and your desires. And also we invoke the elements, earth, moon, sun, planets. And this process of raising, directing, and releasing really takes, if you're doing it properly, 5 to 10 minutes. And a good way to direct and release is to simply keep focused on your intent, or keep mentally focused on your goal. And to release this energy is that some people, believe it or not, they stomp their feet, they shout, they burn, they break something. And a great way to release this energy is, we'll recall chanting, dancing, rocking back and forth, and anything that we... there's some people that deal with sexual magic, obtaining an orgasm as well, will release that energy, and it's very powerful. We know that people like Aleister Crowley use sexual magic, and it was at that energy release that the spell was the most potent. And number 5 is creating channels. And what a channel is in spellcasting is creating ways for this, once the energy is released, it's creating a way for this energy to actually flow. And it's to flow between you and your ultimate goal or your intent. And you've got to put yourself in a perfect position for your spell to manifest. So these particular 5 essential parts are very, very important for spell casting. And again, protecting yourself is very, very super important. Please just don't go into a book and get a book on spells and expect things to happen. I mean, a lot of these movies make it look very glamorous. You know, the witches are very beautiful. They can obtain anything by just reading anything.
And I think that's you know, people that do spells are classified as witches and warlocks and things of that nature. But I think you don't have to be a witch or a warlock. You just classified to do that. You just classified as that or defined as that if you do a spell. Christianity, speaking in tongues, that's nothing more than witchcraft, really. Because there's no need to speak in tongues today. There's no need. If you go into a church, and the church, everybody speaks the same language, what is the need of speaking in tongues? It's nothing more than witchcraft, and that speaks to the hypocrisy of the Christian religion.
Right. I mean, we'll remember, too, that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is just completely filled with spells on different things that they wanted to achieve, that the priests used spells. They're called magicians. They're called sages. There's so many different names. I mean, Merlin was a magician. He did spell casting. Through the ages, the Druids used spell casting. So really, it's just as of late that Hollywood has thought, and
exorcism. The Catholic priests, and everybody thinks, okay, exorcism, it has to be a Catholic priest. It does not have to be a Catholic priest. Catholic priests have the most popularity for performing exorcisms. Exorcism is a spell.
But as with anything in the Bible, spells, it's the power of the word.
And that's right. And that's why
that is the spell.
It's the power of the word. That's why I did a video. I don't know if the video was called Sacraments or it was called Exorcisms, but it's on the YouTube channel. And I did a video talking about how the power is in the word. And the reason why the Catholic priest comes, they practice the word over and over and over again. But if you know the word, the words to say to do the exorcism, then the power's in the word. That's the power. Okay, it's not that priest. It's the powers in the word.
But you're saying that now. So couldn't an exorcism be spell casting?
I just said that a while ago, like 2 minutes ago.
Doesn't that make sense to you?
I just said I
know, but I'm just for those people out there that missed that. But they missed that because the correlation between the Bible and now Christians are telling us, "Ooh, this is evil."
No, it is spell casting. Exorcisms is spell casting.
I mean, and it's movies like my favorite movie, Hocus Pocus, that I just, for whatever reason, I love that movie. Walt Disney did that movie, so that's about 3 the Sanderson sisters that are witches that are now starting to say, you know what, hey, this is okay. I mean,
now Walt Disney was probably dead when that movie took place, but what we can say about Walt Disney. You talking about the Walt Disney Company did the movie.
That's right.
Okay, but what we do know about Walt Disney, if you look at his background, Walt Disney grew up in the time to where scrying and spellcasting was very commonly accepted among people, society.
Well, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, there you go, what you mentioned earlier.
Well, that was written by the Brothers Grimm, and he actually just did the cartoon version of it.
But still, he wanted to do that, and that was still to the public.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at a lot of, and the fact that scrying and spellcasting was so common and so accepted within society that in those times it was put into, again, dramas, comedies, and action stories, action books, drama books, comedy books, and movies and cartoons. And it's only in the last, 80 years that it started to become a thing of horror. And that's just brainwashing. We're being brainwashed to believe that these things are a thing of horror, these things are bad. Like Alexandria gave you all the instructions on how to set up a spell and all the things you needed to do. Same thing I was saying when it comes to scrying. You need to meditate, and I didn't go into detail on it. She would have went more into detail on it. But you need to be in a place alone with your media, and it could be any media that reflects anything. It could be a stone, like Joseph Smith used a stone. The Egyptians used a chalice, a crystal chalice. It could be anything.
A bowl of water.
A bowl of water, even. But you need to be alone. You need to meditate before you start the process. And you need to focus. You just can't spend 2 or 3 minutes and say, oh, this ain't working. You have to focus and open up your mind and see what is revealed to you.
Very, very important. And another thing to make note of, that the Aztecs, when they did their sacrifice, they used their blade was made of obsidian, and John Dee's most famous scrying mirror was made out of obsidian as well. So that maybe there's a link between the power. Obsidian is a particular stone that I'm sure is highly potent.
And it can be the most potent, the most potent stone is the quartz crystal. That's the most potent stone. So any crystal will be more potent than any other reflective media. The thing that you have to realize, though, you don't need a quartz crystal or a crystal stone to do it. You can use a pot, a silver pot that has that you can see a reflection in. A stainless steel pot. Anything. You can use the laptop, like a laptop. If you look down and you see your reflection in the laptop, you can use that as a media. There's anything, but if you want to go and you want to be real about it, not just be a dabbler or somebody who plays, but you want to be real about it, there's plenty of stores that sell crystals. And if you can't afford a crystal, and a lot of crystals are, you can get cheap crystals as well, But if you have a couple $100 to spend on a crystal media, do it. If you don't, find an old antique mirror. Go to an antique store, buy a mirror for like $10-15 and just have it just for scrying purposes only. Cleanse it, bless it, and just use it just for scrying, not for combing your hair, just for scrying.
And that's going to lead us into our third topic of this podcast, and it's another topic that I'm just so very passionate about. I've done several lectures, I've done interviews in regards to Dr. John Dee, and Dr. John Dee was one of Tudor England's most extraordinary and enigmatic figures, an original Renaissance polymath with interest in almost every single branch of learning. And he served Queen Elizabeth I at court. He advised navigators on trade routes to the New World, traveled throughout Europe, and studied ancient history, astronomy, cryptography, and mathematics. And yet he lives on in the collective imagination, largely as a result of his interest in mystical subjects, such as astrology, alchemy, the world of angels, and again, here we go, magical mirrors. This man completely fascinates me. It's fascinated people since the beginning of time. And John Dee was born July 13th, 1527, and it is said that he has died. Some references say 1608, some say 1609 in Mortlake. And he was really an English mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, occult philosopher, advisor again to Queen Elizabeth. He really devoted much of his entire life to the study of alchemy, divination, and Hermetic philosophies. Very, very important. In his alma mater was St. John's College, Cambridge, and the institutions that he attended in his day were Trinity College, Cambridge, Christ College, Manchester. So he was a very educated individual. And John Dee, make no mistake about it, he really straddled the worlds of modern science and magic. And just as the former was really emerging, so magic was really, really emerging as well as science. And he was said, even to this day, again, the most learned man of his age. And he had actually at one time had been invited to lecture on geometry of Euclid at the University of Paris, and this was when he was still in his early 20s, folks. So this shows you that the word about his abilities, his academic achievements had really reached far and wide in his early 20s. And he devoted much time and effort in the last 30 years of his life in an attempt to commune and with the angels in order to learn the universal language of creation. He was just completely spellbound. He really wanted to know the how and the whys of the creation of the universe, and really how it was to bring about the pre-apocalyptic unity of mankind. So almost like in the book of Revelations, he seen maybe where mankind was heading, and he thought if he was able to commune with angels and learn the secrets of the universe, he could maybe stop or prevent or even slow down what was going to happen in the future. Maybe in one of his scrying sessions, he's seen into the future on what would happen if mankind was to continue on its current road. And really in his lifetime, John Dee amassed one of the largest libraries in England. So at that time he had one of the largest libraries, and his high status as a scholar also allowed him to play a role in Elizabethan politics at the time. And as we know, Queen Elizabeth I, without her favor or her approval, John Dee would have been considered a heretic, probably imprisoned in the Tower of London, tortured, and probably burnt at the stake. But he held high favor with Queen Elizabeth, and it was that high favor that allowed him to serve as an occasional advisor, and even, can you believe it, a tutor. So he was actually a tutor to Queen Elizabeth I, and his reputation as a magician and the vivid story of his association with Edward Kelly made him a seemingly irresistible figure to fabulists. So really, Edward Kelly, if you do any research, Edward Kelly was the medium that John Dee used, and very, very important. And even writers of horror stories and later day magicians always made reference to Dr. John Dee, some of his techniques. And there was, in the later part of his life, John Dee looked to the angels to speak with them on how he might heal the very deep and serious rifts between the Roman Catholic Church, the Reformed Church of England, and the Protestant movement of England. So he sought answers from celestial beings to get answers to those questions. Some of his most famous works were the Monus Hieroglyphica, that was in 1564, and he also did a preface to Billingsley's Euclid in 1570, and a general and rare memorials pertaining to the perfect art of navigation in 1577. And also he wrote a book on the mystical role of the seven planets, or the rule of the seven planets, in 1582 and 1583. And very, very important. And it's very important to note too that later in life, with his association with Edward Kelly, he became, and I think my word, it is a proper word, he became obsessed with Enochi language and Enochi magic. And he developed a system of ceremonial magic, and we could call this spellcasting again. Ceremonial magic can be considered spellcasting, and it's based on the invocation and commanding of various spirits. And it was based on the 16th century again of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly, who claimed that through the information that they obtained, they were given the Enochi language from angelic beings and various angels. And Dr. John Dee journals contained the Enochi script and the tables of correspondence that accompanied it. So actually, John Dee and Edward Kelly believed that their visions gave them access to the secrets contained within the Book of Enoch. And I bet you Timothy is aware of the Book of Enoch. And
Let me just tell you this. I didn't want to interrupt you a while ago, but there's a point that she made about John Dee having one of the largest libraries. So he would have had access to the book of Enoch that had been conveniently removed out of our Christian Bible. But if we think of the people who held the most power spiritually and could do the most magic, we think of them as having great knowledge, because, I mean, let's look at it. In Egypt, and what is it, Alexandria?
The Library of Alexandria.
Library of Alexandria, largest collection of books there. So these people were definitely very knowledgeable, just like John Dee. In Rome, they had the largest library as well. So knowledge is very key to success within scrying and magic.
Absolutely,
very
essential.
Now, the book of Enoch is a book that has been removed from the Christian Bible for the simple fact that it does talk about magic, and it does talk about things that people do not want you to have knowledge of. Yet the Pope knows, but nope, they try to keep it from us.
And really, the really raw and cut down basic raw material for the Enochi magical system, and it is said, was dictated, and this is in quotation, was dictated through a series of angelic communication which lasted between 1582 and 1589, and they claimed, John Dee and Edward Kelly claimed that they received this dictation through the instructions of angels. And John Dee, we did tell you, was a scryer, but actually at one point too, Edward Kelly conducted the psychic operation known as scrying, while John Dee kept meticulous written records. And it is said that Edward Kelly looked into a crystal shoe stone and described what he saw, while Dr. John Dee did dictation. So Dr. John Dee was a very fascinating, learned individual, and absolutely essential. And his autobiography, there's been several books, several references. There's movies where Dr. John Dee, I think it's Elizabeth the Golden Age, where they've put the character of Dr. John Dee in the movie, where Queen Elizabeth is asking for guidance when she's facing the fleet of the Spanish Armada and the Inquisition. She goes to Dr. John Dee, and they really give a good vision into what maybe his workspace would have looked like, with globes, astrology charts, and all these different techniques. And you have Queen Elizabeth sitting there and asking specific questions. And at one time it is said that Dr. John Dee owned more than 3,000 printed volumes and 1,000 manuscripts, and they were all housed at his home in Mortlake on the River Thames. And it was actually considered greater than either Oxford or Cambridge universities or colleges and great cathedrals. So he had amassed a lot of knowledge, but tragically it says that his library would not last even as long as he lasted. And in 1583 he actually left England to travel to Eastern and Central Europe, and before he left he entrusted the care of his home and his entire collection to his brother-in-law, Nicholas Framond, who he said unduly sold it presently upon my departure and caused it to be carried away. So this betrayal and the destruction of his library really set the stage, and it really just put him into a whole negative mindset. And he was able to recover some of the contents, but many of the books remained lost for him forever, and very, very tragic. And a number of the volumes were stolen, and they came into hands of various people. And moving forward, a lot of individuals, I have to even tell you that even Aleister Crowley and
I wrote the book on Aleister Crowley, and every time we reference him, I don't know, I learned a lot about that man. And I think that what he used was the fact that he could do, because Aleister Crowley was somebody who went to seminary school and dropped out of seminary school. But he did have some knowledge of magic. But I think he used his knowledge basically to get laid by both men, because he had sex with men and women. But go ahead.
I'm just trying to make this reference because the great works or the knowledge that John Dee did obtain, that people after the fact did seek to better themselves or twist or maybe manipulate their own workings, and it's really, even to this day, for us to grasp John Dee's relationship with Queen Elizabeth is more long-standing and complex than any of us could even begin to imagine. And there's been books where he's made reference to his relationship with Queen Elizabeth and how he was introduced to her. But really, he was indeed, what the real wording is, John Dee was the real, true Renaissance man. He was respected not only as a magician, but as a very meticulous scholar, not just in astrology, but mathematics, everything. And he really took his place in the world of alchemy, and he was able to bring topics of alchemy, medicine, mathematics to Queen Elizabeth's court at a time when these subjects were taboo, and anybody uttering their subjects were considered heretics. So again, I invite you to learn more about Dr. John Dee in regards to alchemy, scrying, astrology, mathematics, navigation. He really covered it all, and he was able to do...
and the dumbed down word would be spellcasting.
Exactly.
That's a very dumbed down word. But, and I would say scrying is broken down into different components as well. You know, if you're using water, if you're using smoke, if you're using fire, it's broken down into different components. But I like to put the umbrella of scrying on all of it, and there you go.
And it's very, these three topics that we brought to you in today's podcast are all intertwined. It's amazing how three particular topics, we have scrying, then we have spellcasting, and we have Dr. John Dee, are all related to each other. The thread of magic runs through these three topics. And we're really inviting you to open your eyes again, and your everyday life, TV shows, movies, anything out there. There's even comic books where I'm sure they have mirrors in them. They're all bringing these ancient techniques to the forefront, but just not saying what they are. They're trying to mask the name.
It's traditional Christianity is trying to do that. Traditional Christianity not being the actual original Christianity. Traditional Christianity is trying to hide things from us and mask things, so they don't want us practicing these things.
And I think Nostradamus, John Dee, Edward Kelly, all these people were trying to unmask these things and bring them to the forefront, and asking individuals to maybe realize your true potential. And John Dee had the protection of Queen Elizabeth. He was able to, do all of his alchemy, astronomy, and I mean, he was instrumental in, and this is factual, when she was against the Spanish Armada, that she gave her specific predictions in regards to the outcome.
Physics. You mentioned John Dee and physics, right? Mm-hmm. Physics is like today we think of quantum physics and things of that nature, but physics, John Dee would have probably been the most famous physicist of his time. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And so, so to say spell casting is what it is it's an ingredients. There's a recipe to do and accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. There's a recipe to accomplish scrying. There's a recipe to accomplish, and we'll dumb it down and say different spells. But, there's a recipe for everything. And so, him being a physicist, he understood the power of reflection, scrying. He understood the power of the sun, the plants,
and the power of the word, the angelic word for creation.
And the power of the word for creation. And so I absolutely believe that through scrying, that him and Edward Kelly did talk with angels. I believe that.
And let's put this into perspective on how high of esteem John Dee was held. It was actually William Pembroke, who was another of John Dee patrons, with Robert Dudley, who was the Earl of Leicester. Actually, it was the Earl of Leicester that introduced Dee to Elizabeth, and it was Robert Dudley who actually sought Dee's advice on a date for Queen Elizabeth's upcoming coronation. So at that particular time, his advice and his knowledge must have been widely sought for him to actually pick a date for her up and coming coronation. And actually it says that he cast astrologer the charts to cast a perfect day for her coronation. And really sadly, a lot of these charts are now lost. And it would be just so awesome to have access to these charts. And on a sadder note, that this individual that was so learned in all these areas actually pretty well died penniless. And it's very sad. People, brilliant individuals through history, it's sad that a lot of them meet the same fate as they die penniless. But their legend lives on, because we do practice a lot of the techniques that he's brought to the forefront in regards to magic, alchemy, physics, mathematics, everything.
Yes, we do. And it's a shame that with the technology we have today, that everybody except for NASA's really still on this stuff, and we're still studying it, but the majority of society's quit studying it.
And it's, a lot of people, when they talk about spellcasting, scrying, and John Dee, they think of a conjurer as another name. When you're conjuring demons, spellcasting, it's a lot more than that, folks.
They said they talked to angels, so I don't think they were trying to conjure demons.
But when people think of spellcasting and what have you, the word of conjuring comes in, and that's where the negative.
Here's an interesting fact for you. What biblical man of God was said to have conjured demons to do his work?
That I'm still learning on the Bible.
King Solomon.
You know what, I was just about to say that, because it said that we, now that we're talking about the sigils, King Solomon's seals and symbols, that's a form of spell casting, because those Timothy actually wears King Solomon's sigil with an angel on it. That's a form of spell casting because it has symbols on it.
And there's power, and there's a lot of power out there for people that wanna embrace it, use it, and you think of the different societies out there and different religious faiths, and when I say religious faiths, I'm just not talking about Christianity, but you talk about the Gnostics, which we need to do a show about the Gnostics, but the Gnostics understood different spells and powers and things like that, and they were basically laughed at and ran out. But they're still Gnostics in the Christian faith today. But then you have Wiccas, the Wicca religion and things like that. I've met a lot of Wiccans that are just fake. They don't really practice what they preach, And so we're now talking to a Wicca. You said she's a Wicca, right?
Yes.
And she's supposed to be on the show. What's her name? Jamie?
Yes.
Jamie's supposed to be on the show at some point. And, and she seems to be somebody who's really into what she says she's into.
Well, for her, it's not. I mean, the word that comes to mind is practice what you preach. That this is just not a game or a fantasy. This is a lifestyle, folks, and she is true to the lifestyle of the heathen Wiccan faith. And I mean, I've known her for quite a while, so she is true to the true faith.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that ain't. There's a lot of imposters out there. There's a lot of people that just play the game.
Well, hence why, an individual will walk into a bookstore and buy a book on spells, and they think it's quite funny to start dabbling into something they have no concept on how powerful it can be.
And so for the veterans out there, you know what I mean when I say play the game. But there's a lot of people that like to play the game. And so, but she seems to be real which is good. I look forward to having her on the show.
She will be a great guest, and she can give you an inside perspective on it. This is not a fantasy. It's not a TV show. It's not a sitcom. This is something that is an everyday. It's your lifestyle. You live and breathe it 24/7.
Yep. And so, actually, one of the things that Alexandria constantly mentions is Aleister Crowley. Crowley. So, with that, what I would like to say is I wrote the book on Aleister Crowley, and if you want to purchase it, you can go to Amazon.com, type in Aleister Crowley by me, Timothy Mark, or you can go to BarnesandNobles.com and type in Aleister Crowley by me, Timothy Mark.
I mentioned it because you did a really good perspective on him, very informative.
So for those people that are serious about this stuff, that really want to know from people who are very serious as well, and I didn't put out a cookie cutter book. I put out facts that maybe people won't like, maybe people will like, but I put out facts, and it's not cookie cutter at all. It's by people who actually believe and are practicing certain things, which is us. Timothy, for those people that don't understand when I say us, it's the Timothy and Alexandria show. It's me, Timothy Mark, and her, Alexandria.
Yeah, so when we do these podcasts, we are very factual, and sometimes facts can be hard to digest. Facts can be something that you're not wanting to hear about, because a fantasy world that you create is far easier instead of getting out of your comfort zone. We hope that these shows inspire all of you to get out of your comfort zone, do research, seek true knowledge, and realize that movies, TV, and everything that you see and read on the internet is not always factual. I mean, if you don't prepare yourself, you don't do your research, it can put you in a world of hurt. Prior to any kind of spell casting, please prepare yourself. Don't go into it like it's an episode of Charmed or anything. I mean, these are all for entertainment purposes. We don't do this for entertainment purposes. It is a lifestyle.
For what it's meant to be. So no, it's not for entertainment. This is for what it's meant to be. And we're helping to educate people who really want to learn about these subjects.
We want to engage you, and we want to, like I said, educate you on the proper ways for anything. Just like when you're making a cake, there's a proper way to bake a cake. If you're missing some of the ingredients, the cake is not going to turn out properly. Just like with scrying and spellcasting, if you miss some of the most important ingredients, it's not going to work, and then you're going to get frustrated and think that it doesn't work. The power is indeed in the word, and we hope that the words that we bring to you in these podcasts will engage you, inspire you, educate. So it's engage, inspire, and educate.
Let me speak to the people over 40 out there. The people that's over 40 out there, your grandparents would have knew the power of these things, because they would have grew up in a time to where this was accepted among society, and they would also be in that time frame to where this turned bad, and it had a bad reputation. Had a bad reputation because people were doing it for the wrong things. So they understood the power, and if you ask them, they'll kind of avoid the subject or whatever, not really want to talk about it. So yeah, if you're over 40, chances are you have grandparents that actually understand this. And if you see somebody that's 78 or up, 78 years old or older, ask them about these things, and they'll tell you, because it was accepted to the point to where it was in popular culture.
And another example of this is doing divining rods for water. There was a lot of farmers that in the 1800s, to look for a water to do a well on your land, you use divining rods, and it's very acceptable. Some of them still do it today. That it's now a form of divination, but it's a way to search for water sources under the ground.
What I like to do is take somebody that's been walking in the desert for about 2.5 days, put them out there in the middle of North Carolina somewhere, and see if they can't find water. And that's better than a divination rod, probably, right?
I guess so. I guess that's a lot easier.
Yeah. So that was a joke. for everybody out there. But, so anyway, that's all I got to say. What about you?
I think, this has been a fascinating podcast. We've brought topics to you that you may have heard about them from different words, different avenues, but I think we've shed light on something that's been around again for a long time. It's just the method of deliverance is different based on social media and based on religious cultures.
But I got some gripes and complaints that don't have nothing to do with this, actually. Some gripes and complaints about food today. Like, I can't count how many times we tried to buy grape juice and failed. We looked at Welch's, it sucked. Looked at other brands, it sucked. And actually, if you go to the grocery store, there's a no-name brand, and it's only $1, and it's 100% grape juice, and it tastes delicious.
And that's a turnaround for you, because you used to be very wanting name brand only.
Yeah, name brand only. But then when you taste so much stuff that tastes like crap, like, look at Hawaiian. I think as you age, things start to taste different to you. Hawaiian Punch, they make this thing. I can't stand the taste of this shit today. And I like the 100% juices. Coconut water, I hate. I hate the coconut water that we got. It has sugar in it. And damn, man, it just sucks.
Well, I think on that note, I mean, we can't. We'll leave it again.
But caramel M&Ms, man. If you ever see a pack of caramel M&Ms, grab them things. They're in a little blue bag. They're excellent.
Yeah, we get sugared up when we do a lot of our research to keep our energy level up, because we are, again, folks, super, super busy. So, I mean, you got to do what you got to do to be able to engage people and do what we have to do. And again, reminder, we have an event that's coming up tomorrow, Tuesday. Yeah,
tomorrow, Tuesday. But for everybody that wants to reach out to us, the email, if you want to send us any comments, whatever, the email is World Paranormal Research Society @gmail.com. And the website's worldparanormalresearchsociety.org. O-R-G. And then the YouTube channel is World Paranormal Research Society. So subscribe.
And please listen to our podcast, share our podcast, and we'd love to hear from you, your comments, any guest suggestions, topic suggestions. We'd like to hear it all. And if possible, please keep your criticism on a positive level. I mean, there is such thing as constructive criticism, but we're all trying to be in a positive zone.
Well, there's constructive criticism, but then there's criticism where people don't know what they're talking about. Now, granted, you have to take the context of the conversation. Like, please understand what the context of the conversation is. Don't focus on one word. Granted, it's difficult for a lot of women out there.
Excuse.
Okay, I shouldn't say that. I should say people. It's difficult for a lot of people out there to put things in the context of the conversation. Again, if I say that we are doing an event and she will be doing something at the event, I'm talking about we, Timothy and Alexandria. And when I say she, I'm talking about Alexandria. Put it in the context. We only saying this because we did have some feedback. I took part of the feedback as constructive, and the other part I just took as airheaded. So there you go.
I mean, we can't add any more to that. So yeah. We'll just leave it as is. And again, thank you everybody for who are listening to us. Please subscribe, share, and like I said, we're going to be bringing these podcasts with topics that are informative, that will educate, expand your horizons. Take care, everybody.
Bye.